Thank you very much. Yes, as just explained, I'm a partner at Charcoalblue, and we're a design consultancy looking at new theatres, entertainment, performance spaces, but also into the world of lecture theatre, in workspace design, event spaces, that type of thing. So although I'm not an expert in the learning environment, and it's been fascinating listening to some of the things this morning, what we do know a lot about is places for creating space for engagement, and how we create a space where people can really engage and exchange information. So here we go, here's some of our theatres. That's the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford-upon-Avon, but we also translate the same things to places like Scottish Power headquarters, and looking at the same principles for performance and theatre design. That could be in a restoration of historic theatre. This is the Hudson on Broadway. Or indeed within schools and universities. This is for Wells Cathedral School and their music performance space. And there are lots and lots of things that contribute to a great auditorium. And I'm going to go through a little bit of background about what we think makes a great space before we look into the future and how technology might impact that. And the two real drivers when we're trying to design a theatre and an auditorium space, and I should say I'm going to use auditorium unapologetically to describe everything from a conference room through to a symphony hall, because I think that place of a sense of a place for engagement, a place for communication, really, auditorium sums that up best. And what we really try and do is make a space that is both intimate and collective. And I think if you can achieve that within a space, then you're really on the right lines. So let's just drill a little bit more into what those words mean. So an intimate space, anyone know what that is? Love Island. No, it's not Love Island, it's a fire. Look, there's an intimate space. The ultimate intimate space is gathering around a fireplace. There's a reason why the producers of Love Island chose that. Because this is the very definition of intimacy, and the origins really of storytelling is gathering round a fire, probably telling a ghost story under that glow where you have a real connection with someone speaking. And if we can try and tap into something like that, as an audience member, you're totally drawn in and connected to the presenter, you've created an intimate space. And I think it's really interesting looking at how, if you're reading a kid a story, you don't read them a story talking to them like this. You sit next to them and read them a story there. Same if you look at someone teaching someone something on a one-to-one level. Really, to get intimate, they sit next to them and look at what they're doing together. And when we're trying to design auditoria, that's really a key part of what we're going to do. This is the Liverpool Everyman Theatre, which is Howard Tompkins Architects. We work with them designing this. And you'll see what we've tried to do. This is pre-show. This is there's an usher on stage waiting for it to start, but really trying to wrap the audience around the space and create a sense of intimacy in there. The next key element then, if we've got intimacy, which is the connection between the presenter and their audience, is a sense of collectiveness. And it's really important that you come to these places and you gather, not just to have a relationship with the person talking, but also a relationship with everybody else around there. And a football stadium is a brilliant example of that, of how do you kind of feel like you're part of a crowd. If you don't get that, there's no reason for all coming together. And that's what we try and do in auditorium design. So this is the end of the show at the Liverpool Everyman. You can see the audience has risen as one. Obviously, it was a good performance. But there's some interesting things I'd point out to you. There's a guy there. He's actually interacting with the people next to him. He's looking for validation that what he's doing is standing up right. And my favourite is the side eyes coming in here, of just looking in and saying, yes, we're in this together. This is a collective experience that we have sensed in the moment. So part of my interest is how this applies to the future. And clearly we're designing a performing arts building. We tend to think, does 25 years before a minor refurbishment, maybe 50 years between a major refurbishment. So we have to be thinking about not a space for just now, but a space for the future. And why that's particularly interesting, if we're going back into history, is we think about what we've just come through as a society, and really we've come through the third industrial revolution, as a lot of people will tell you. And I'll come back to this in a bit, but after each of these, there were major changes in the way we congregated and the way we had auditorium. And there are some people who would argue that actually we're in the middle of a fourth industrial revolution right now. But what I'm really interested in is what's the post-digital revolution congregation space like? And the way I would define what that's going to be, it's an information age. If you look at the digital technology, my background is as a sound engineer, and digitization of sound was about getting the audio from one place to another place more effectively and being able to manipulate it. And that really is what digital technology does. It's an information exchange and making that more efficient and more repeatable. So I think we're going into an information age that's going to be defined by technology. Let's look at some of that technology. We've got things like VR. Isn't that brilliant? You could just kind of walk around and pretend you're somewhere else with a headset on and play games maybe. Or perhaps AR, where we can overlay information onto the real world. You've got things like artificial intelligence. No one quite knows how to draw that, so you always see a circuit board for a head. But the idea that computers themselves have agency and the ability to change and adapt through machine learning. And even another step to humanize it, the idea of blockchain, that data has a past. It's not just a one-off thing, that it has this huge chain behind it. And self-driving car, and of course, much more excitingly, a self-driving Hoover. So you could just let it go around your house and pick things up. But as far as I know, there's one technology invention we haven't had yet, and that's a time machine. And when you're doing a presentation about the future and what the auditorium of the future is going to look like, it's a bit of a problem that you haven't been to the future. So I'm really pleased that you had sort of case studies to start the day and a really excellent presentation on data-led design, because those are facts. But everything from this point on, I'm going to be making up, because I've not been to the future. But I'm just giving you some ideas of what it might be. Maybe we go to the past to help predict the future. Like blockchain, we also have a past. So perhaps we can look to it, and in a bit of a what did the Romans ever do for us moment, we're actually going to go to the Greeks, because they did more for auditorium design. So maybe we look at the history of the Greeks and what they did. Or as a theatre professional, I'm contractually obliged to mention Shakespeare. So maybe we go to the bard himself and look at the globe and work out, perhaps we can learn about the future from him. But there was a clue earlier where I said what I think we should look at. And we should ask the question not how have auditoria changed, but why have they changed, and use that to help predict where we're going to go. And one of the things I like to look at the moment is how have the Industrial Revolutions changed our auditoria, and can we use that to help predict in the future what we're going to need to do. So the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, the mass manufacture, and the idea where we started the factories, where everyone came from the fields and we suddenly had these things. Some of the key trends of that. Well, mass urbanisation. Some of these great cities, Birmingham, places like that, really people came into the factories. And because of that, people not working for a landowner gentry anymore, there was a new working class, a new sense of democracy and a sense of place in the world, Sheffield and steel and all of those things. And in auditorium design, what we then came up with or an output of that was the idea of a music hall. And that sort of space, a bit like this Wilton's in London. And the music hall, what I point out to you here is an absolute essence of democracy and a new type of working class who want to be all in one room together. Look at how the two balconies are very, very linear, not facing the stage, they're facing each other. This is a place to go and have a party, have a riot, and be part of something really great. And this kind of music hall really was the forerunner of the kind of the theatrical revolution of this time of the late 1800s, where Frank Matcham and people like that built all the great houses in the West End as variety theatres and hippodromes and that idea. And we had things like technology, the steelwork suddenly meant we could cantilever balconies. So you see the supported balconies. We could go to cantilever balconies there because we had the steel, which meant you could get the audience so much closer and so much all in one space. So that was the first Industrial Revolution. What about the technological? So this is where we get to electrics and we get to infrastructure and things like that, just before the outbreak of World War I, really. And a lot of the things, because of World War I, that happened were post-war. And the post-war period was really a time of idealism. It was a really fashionable time. We think about the 20s and we think about the glamour of that. It was a moment where people had come out of, suddenly it felt anything was possible, and you wanted a picture to another world that you could be prosperous. And we had the perfect type of auditorium for that. There was a cinema. And you think about the super cinemas of the 20s, became this brilliant response to technology, which was mirroring society. And we think about the form of a cinema, whereas compare it to the music hall, where we were all around the sides, looking at each other, being part of the same room. This is an escapist form. This is a form that you sit there and look at a screen, a bit like you're in now. And so many of our modern auditoria, and particularly our modern lecture theatres, owe their history to cinema. And we should just think about that and pause for that second, because it's a really important point. This was the point where the person standing here wasn't the most important. Your friends in the audience weren't the most important. The reason these were built was so everyone could see the screen. And that's really where our current lecture theatre design, many of lecture theatres still hold that principle. So now, digital revolution. What are the key society trends of the digital revolution? We're in an experience economy. People like to have an experience and spend their time doing that, not to build for the future and look to the future. It's about the now. The digital and the analog worlds are absolutely combined. There's no distinction between where something is analog. Every experience has an analog component and a digital component. It's a visual-based world. We're designing a space at the moment. We're working with BAFTA on the redevelopment of their headquarters in Piccadilly. And a key part of that design is a wall of masks so people can go and take their picture for Instagram. And I'm sure lots of people here have designed Instagram-ready spaces for a visual experience. And it's on demand. It's now, it's Netflix, it's Deliveroo. It's that kind of world that we're living in, where people want things at the right time, at the time that suits them, in the place that suits them. So I'm going to go through each of those points and give you some ideas about how I think that could impact auditorium design and where technology can play a part in that. So space for experiences. Esports, and this spectacle and this huge idea that we're coming in and we're having this total landmark experience, and look how many people are there. It's a total experience-centric thing. But also, going back to the Everyman, the opening of the Everyman. We went there and it wasn't just to come into the theatre, there was fireworks. We had to be there at the moment. Now, at the start, I told you I wasn't an expert in learning environments, and you're probably going, this probably is exposing that the lecturers and the people you work with aren't going to have fireworks at the start of every lecture to create an experience. So perhaps we've got to look for different ways. But I think we can do that through design and technology in many ways. It's interesting hearing about the University of Surrey. I went to the University of Surrey, and I was in the music and the performing arts department. And then there was in the business building, they had this huge ship-shaped building, and there's a lecture theatre at the top of it. And of course, everyone wanted to have their lecture up there, to have the experience of being at the top of the building looking out over campus. Each time you think about a space, even silly things like, don't name it by numbers, give it a name. We do a lot of work with Google. I spend a lot of time in Google buildings. You don't go to room 1.12, you go to Hunky Dory or something like that, and that's your meeting room. And that's an experience, really simple experience-based economy things. And technology can help you with that because, and this was alluded to in some of the other presentations, it's adaptable. You can change things. Each time you go, it's a slightly different experience. That might be through visual technology, or it might be through audio. You might have the ability to change the characteristic of a room to suit the style of presentation that's in there. But I think even more importantly than that, we should think about what the experience is like being in a room. And we should think about what it's like to sit there and look at a screen. And is this really the best type of experience that people who are used to looking at screens every day want? Because I would argue the problem you've got here in terms of intimacy and collectiveness, if you're sitting down there, you can't see the person sitting up there. You're not having a collective experience together. It also can be a barrier to intimacy because it's designed for intimacy with the screen, not for intimacy with the presenter. This is where I'm going to, upset everyone filming, because if I step forward into here, you can instantly see how that relationship changes from me standing over there to if I stand back here, there's a very, very different relationship. And we should think about all the different forms of an auditorium. So we're using an entirely traditional means to create much more collective and also intimate spaces together. And I think when you're looking to build a space for the experience economy, we have to think about how everyone reacts there. And of course, that will create this space for experience. I'm not talking about anything new. This is a perfect example. The focus of this room, the old operating theatre, is of course what's happening and a live experience in the middle. So weirdly, one of the things that can happen with the digital revolution is we can embrace the live, and we can, because suddenly the content here is in a way less important. There's about 2 million pixels behind me here, a few more on the sidewalls up there. Each one of you's got at least 1.5 in your hand in terms of information flow. So be liberated by that. Get the content more closer to people, make that more intimate, and remove the relationship with the screen and make it about the person in the room. And that gives us the integrated and analog experience. I'm going to talk about an experience I have that had a mixture of analog and digital, and it's a confession time. This is me. I'm a big cycling fan. I like riding my bike, but I love watching cycling as well. And this was last summer, you can tell, in North Devon. And there was a bike race going on. So I started this as an entirely analog experience. The weather is analog. I'm largely analog. My children are drinking analog hot chocolate that I paid with analog money for, because it was a little stall. And we waited for the bike race to happen. When it happened and they came past us, there's me, textbook cheering position, cheering them on there. But what you also see is this is a picture of the TV coverage that day that I went home, paused and took a photo to show that I was on there and have a collective experience with my friends saying, look, I was there, did you see me? I'm having a relatively intimate one-on-one experience with the rider there. In the yellow coat is my wife holding my phone, and that's the photo she took. So she is also digitizing that experience to create an intimacy and a collectiveness post-event. And it's just an example of where we think about analog and digital combining. And really, as I say, it's about data exchange. And think about the data exchange that happens in Auditoria. The actors are talking to the presenters. They're exchanging data. They're also receiving feedback. And I'm deliberately using technological words for this. They're receiving feedback from the audience. And that's happening all over the space. They're also interacting with each other and talking to each other and to people off stage. So if we think about an auditorium being a space for data exchange, then suddenly we can think about which of those should be analog, which of those should be digital, and how do we create that mesh together. This is a slide I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on because I could talk about it for hours, but it is about the different levels of digital engagement that we think about as you define a space. So starting with playback, everything will have playback and will have a centrally stored content that pushes it out. But then we build broadcast and conversation where we have things two ways. And interestingly enhanced, it was fascinating thinking about the use of data, and could you capture live data? This is often used in BMS and that type of thing, but you could have live occupancy and dynamically adjust the room bookings. Even better than that, you can look at face recognition and see who's engaged in a talk and who's engaged in a presentation and adapt that, give that feedback directly to the lecturer, or use it to go, actually that didn't quite work so well in that space, we should use this space here. And then intelligent is the moment where AI and machine learning starts to inform our use of the space and the experience. Moving on to immersive and visual. So yeah, we're in a very visual space. This is Atlanta Falcons Stadium, where Super Bowl was this year. And look at the LED screens. Look how visual that is, bringing the scale down a bit. We see places like, this is a space we worked on for Facebook. This is their headquarters in London. Everywhere you look, you can see a screen. It's not one central screen. It's about, this is their canteen, where you can be around, how the walls are Instagram purple, how the cameras and everything work together, but really getting to the point that it's not about one primary display, it's about multiple little displays. I've just got to put a VR slide in there because lots of people are talking about VR as the future. I don't think it is for Auditorium. I think it's not at all collective. And I think that anything headset-based really diminishes the point of us coming together. Perhaps we can use sound to help that, but we've been doing some research into it, and there's some really great film and 360 video uses, but at the moment, I'm struggling to see that. Much more interesting is this, not because of the quantity of people and the great experience they're having, but by the number of phones up there, and just thinking about how many content devices. And we've all seen photos like this where phones are out. And phones are just one example of local content. And they're intimate. Your own phone next to you, holding that is quite an intimate experience. Moving through to on-demand, another of the key elements we talked about in post-digital revolution age. And on-demand basically comprises these two elements of our digital engagement. And what I would push people to do is always to see it as a conversation and not just as a broadcast. Really, for a learning environment and a meaningful interaction, it cannot be one way. It can't be someone standing here capturing something to send it back. You have to start building in that feedback loop, and why not have different spaces linked together, particularly when we're looking at reducing our travel, reducing our carbon footprint from that side of things. We've got a responsibility to think about how do we create a collective experience when people aren't in the same room? So it has to be a conversation. And in the world of broadcast and capture, it's increasingly important for lecture theatre design. And every space we design, every auditorium we design, will be building in the camera positions from day one. We'll be putting removable seats in the middle. We'll be making sure that you don't take out a row by having to have a camera on the end there. We'll be thinking about that as very much part of the experience, because the necessity for broadcast and for capture and the expectation of the quality is so high. So if you don't build that in and you produce a substandard product, that's not through criticism of anyone, but the work you have to do to create that will be not as good as people can film off their phone or as they're used to watching on YouTube. So you'll be considered that the quality of what you're presenting isn't good enough. So that's a key thing for us. On that world of on-demand, there's a few interesting thoughts here. So, of course, there's the full green screen broadcast studio, and that's really just to talk about not necessarily saying we should be building green screen spaces to do that. We should be creating collective, intimate spaces, but we should be looking to the broadcast industry for that technology. Hologram projection, that's kind of cool, isn't it? I mean, what I love about hologram projection is it uses one of the oldest theatre techniques in history, which is Pepper's Ghost, which is where you put basically a light shining to someone off stage to reflect onto a gauze to make it seem like someone's there. What's interesting about that is it's human scale. It's human scale broadcast. It is a person in the room. And that applies to the other example here, which if any of you aren't familiar with, it's the AV1 robot, which a company called No Isolation developed, and it was developed for children with long-term illnesses. So you can the robot sits in the classroom while they sit at home remotely when they can't get there. It's a really cool product. And to my point about how you tell someone a story, you notice they're next to each other. They are part in the room, they're collective, but also very, very intimate because it's a one-on-one connection. It's not a camera at the back of the room that lots of people are looking to. My final on-demand bit is the idea that on-demand doesn't just mean you have to watch at home. It means building buildings in the right place, where people want them, and so they're accessible. This is St Anne's Warehouse in Brooklyn. It's right under the Brooklyn Bridge in Dumbo. It was a place that needed a theatre. We found an old building, and with the organisation, the arts organisation, put it in there. So don't think about on-demand as just being how do we send things around the world. Think locally about where we can build spaces. Quick summary then. Auditorium of the future. We talked about all of these things, and my headline is the Auditorium of the future is going to embrace live, but be liberated by the technology. We shouldn't see technology as a bolt-on. We should see the two things working in parallel and never, ever forgetting the reason people come here is for a live experience. That's why you have to really think about how do we make that as good as possible, and the digital is enhancing that. There's lots of technology I haven't talked about that I could talk about, things like augmented reality and more. 5G, I think we're all kind of aware, is going to make data flow without Wi-Fi, and suddenly that opens a lot of possibilities. And really interested in the idea about how edge computing is going to change this experience, because what that will mean is, if you don't know, is that all the processing, you kind of, rather than all linking back to a central server and a central cloud, you have much more peer-to-peer, and all your processing is kind of like shared. So all your phone processors can kind of work in tandem together and join as one sort of mesh network. It's really, rather than having to rely on a central server and a high bandwidth pipe going back to it. And what that means is the little point-to-point interactions, the possibilities are much greater. That's kind of all I wanted to say. I'm I mean, it's not all I wanted to say, it's all I had time to say. As you can probably guess, I could go on about this a lot, and I'm fully aware I've given no answers, but I am happy to take any questions.